Not all of us are stuck in a simple job like my sister. If it had been anyone else, I might have laughed it off and let the words dissolve into the clatter of cutlery and the sugar-crusted chatter that rises at an upscale Manhattan brunch. But Sloane knows exactly where to set her glass and exactly how hard to tap the rim so the sound carries to every ear that matters. And she knows the cadence of our family's laughter, the way it swells on cue when she gives them something sharp to. The restaurant is all white tile and brass fixtures, the kind of place that photographs well even when nothing else does. And I'm seated between my mother's careful perfume and my father's weekend optimism, watching the sunlight slide across plates of lemon ricotta pancakes and towers of oysters no one asked for, wondering how a room can feel so festive and so precarious at the same time. Sloane tilts her chin, lets the light catch her cheekbone, and with the false modesty of a pageant queen tells our cousins that some of us take risks and chase promotions and negotiate with people who wear watches that cost more than rent, while others, and here her eyes flick to me with the soft cruelty of a practiced sister, prefer to stay small, safe, helpful, simple. My first instinct is to shrink to the size of the comment, to fold into the hem of my navy dress and become something the room has to search for, because I grew up learning that being loud draws lightning, and being meek draws mercy, and because experience has taught me that the fastest way to end a scene is to give the star nothing to play against. But I'm also 31 and done pretending that someone else's comfort is the tax for my peace, so I take a slow sip of coffee I don't want, keep my mouth still, and let the burn teach me to stay. Around us, servers breeze like well-dressed roomers, setting down plates that glitter with syrup and citrus, and from the next table a woman in an emerald-wrapped dress glances over with the sympathy of a stranger who recognizes a dynamic that has taken years to choreograph. "I'm kidding," Sloane adds, the way she always does when the silence doesn't break fast enough into applause. "You know I adore you, Ava." And the "you" lands with a softness that would be convincing if the vowels didn't stretch like taffy around a hook. My mother reaches for her water as if thirsty for someone had paid in advance, as if a benevolent ghost was footing the bill, as if generosity had grown teeth. No one at our table had given a card. The cousins were still arguing about who'd Venmo whom. My parents never assume free meals unless the check says so in writing, and I had planned on paying myself because last week was a good week, and because it always sounded easier to spend money than to spend words. Sloane's smile pinched when she heard him, just a half-second of static on a glossy station, and she raised her mimosa a fraction too high before bringing it back down like she hadn't felt anything at all. There's a rhythm to humiliation when it comes from someone you used to braid hair with. It doesn't arrive as a slap. It arrives as a story told in present tense to people who have known you long enough to mistake familiarity for accuracy. And Sloane tells it well, the one where bold older sister breaks a record and signs a client and navigates rooms I would get lost in, while younger sister, and I can feel the air quotes even when she's not moving her fingers, files paperwork and answers phones and avoids stress like it's a disease she could catch. In her version, my accomplishments are anecdotes, my nights are early, my dreams are folded into drawers, and my resume is a receipt for items no one will return. I could say something. I could clear my throat and mention the Monday strategy session, the one the board added late Friday night when the acquisition clock shifted, the one where I am supposed to present the scenario analysis that determined the valuation our CEO will defend, the one I prepared until 2 a.m. with a team that thinks to bring me ginger tea without asking. But I've learned that truth offered too soon sounds like defensiveness, and truth offered too late sounds like gloating. So I let the table run on its own oxygen, and I reach for the jam. And that's when I see it, a sliver of glossy paper protruding from Sloane's handbag, which she keeps conveniently open on the banquette beside her, as if the purse needs air. The logo at the top is unmistakable even from a tilt. It belongs to a luxury brand that sells shoes shaped like celebratory decisions, and bags that require waiting lists and a private appointment. And beneath the logo I catch the faint outline of numbers that carry the kind of zeros that make accountants sigh. Sloane notices my emails before 6, And I know exactly how my sister's spine straightens when his name glows on her phone as if the letters alone were a promotion. She flips the device over, face down against the seat, and offers the table a smile that makes the cousins breathe again. "I was joking," she says, as if humor were a disinfectant. "Ava's great at what she does." And then, as if the compliment might have been too generous to sit unbalanced, she adds, "She just doesn't like the pressure of leadership." And the word pressure lands on my plate like a garnish someone thought would be cute but tastes like soap. My mother squeezes my knee under the table, a coded apology for the daughter she can't wrangle, and I allow myself one long inhale that smells like powdered sugar and oranges and the maple syrup that will never not stain. And I decide I will not let Sloane write me in past tense today. When we were girls in Ohio, riding cracked bikes to the library, Sloane would run her fingers under sections of books and tell me which sentences mattered and which ones were filler. And I learned early where the index of truth is filed, which is probably why my shame, which always arrives on time, begins to calcify into a slow and deliberate heat that doesn't want to make a scene so much as it wants to make a record. I notice the waiter again, the same quiet man with a careful smile, delivering a second bottle of champagne not ordered by anyone, announcing that it has been arranged, and I see Sloane's face do that almost imperceptible flicker of calculation, and I file it under Today's Mysteries with a neat label. Who paid and why, and at what cost? Across from me, my cousin Dylan, whose default setting is diversion, leans forward to ask about my weekend, and I'm grateful for the detour until Sloane answers on my behalf with a lightness that feels like theft, telling the table that I'm probably spending my Sunday prepping slide decks and tidying my inbox since she's nothing if not organized. And the cousins laugh because organization is always adorable until it isn't. And I take another sip of coffee I don't need and place my cup down in a way that says I'm collecting myself, not surrendering. The phone buzzes again, and this time Sloane glances at it like it might explode if ignored, and I can't help myself. I let my eyes flick back to the purse and the receipt. Anyway, I should not think about Monday. I should not think about the slide that shows the downside risk if the supplier's debt is misreported. I should not think about the email our CEO sent last night asking me to keep the story clean, which is rich, considering stories are rarely clean and almost never kept. But thinking about work is easier than thinking about my sister's right hand reaching under the table to push her purse deeper into the corner, as if it could merge with the wall if she wills it hard enough. I swallow to moisten a throat that has begun to betray me, and I lift my head in time to see my mother's gaze travel to my face, searching, always searching, for the emotion she thinks I am hiding, and I give her the smallest smile I can manage without cracking, because this is a family sport, and I am not here to lose. Our server reappears with a tray of pastries we didn't order, and when my father asks about the extra food, the server repeats the line about the table being covered, and this time my mother's eyebrows knit, because generosity without a source is a story without a narrator, and she doesn't trust those. "By whom?" she asks, and the server's smile tips as he glances toward the hostess stand, where a man in a navy suit has just stepped inside from the glare of late morning, removing sunglasses with the unhurried grace of someone accustomed to being the reason a room reorganizes itself. The hostess leans toward him with that combination of deference and delight that money buys even when it's trying to be discreet. And as he hands her the glasses and says something I can't hear, I don't need the confirmation of a name to know the shape of power walking toward our table. Sloane sees him a beat after I do, which is unusual because she's always been the one to spot the principal before the rest of the class. And in that fraction of delay, I witness something human on her face. Not cruelty, not triumph, but the fearful math of a person calculating whether a story she's told is about to be interrupted by facts. My mother inhales. My father sits up. The cousins straighten their spines as if posture alone makes you closer to a promotion. And I feel my shame finish its transformation into a still, dense thing that settles low and steady. Because whether I wanted a scene or not, I am about to be. Us, balancing a tray of croissants, seem to hesitate as though aware that the name he had just heard did not belong to the woman Sloane had described with such casual cruelty. I looked up, meeting the steady gaze of a man I knew professionally as both exacting and impossible to impress, and I felt the tiniest current of vindication pulse through me, not because I needed the family's eyes to widen, but because I had spent the last half hour swallowing humiliation while my sister turned my life into a comedy set, and here was the universe in a tailored navy suit undoing her punchline. "Gregory," I answered, keeping my voice level because I knew any tremor, any flicker of pride would be filed as evidence against me. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I," he said with that half-smile employees whispered about, the one he saved for people who had earned more than his polite attention. He stepped closer, resting a hand on the back of my chair with the comfort of someone who knew my seat belonged to him if he wanted it. "But fortune has a way of placing people where they should be. I trust you're prepared for Monday's strategy session." The words hit the table like glassware shattering, sharp and undeniable. My father's fork slipped against porcelain. My mother blinked twice as though she hadn't heard correctly. My cousin's eyes darted between me and Sloane, searching for the script that made sense. And Sloane herself, my polished, immaculate sister who had just finished painting me as a harmless little clerk, sat frozen, mimosa halfway to her lips, color draining from her face in a slow, damning tide. She laughed, too loudly, too quickly, trying to catch the moment before it escaped. "Gregory, you must be mistaken," she said, voice pitched in that saccharine register she used whenever she thought charm could undo reality. "Ava just does admin work, filing, scheduling. You know how families exaggerate." Gregory's eyes did not leave mine, and in that unwavering contact was a validation more powerful than anything I could have said myself. He didn't even acknowledge Sloane's interruption. Instead, he chuckled, low and certain. "If what your sister does is admin, then perhaps we need to redefine the term. Without her analysis, our acquisition deal would collapse before it reached the negotiating table." My mother's hand fluttered toward her necklace, fingers pressing against, addressing the entire table. "Teasing is one thing, but you should know your daughter here is indispensable. Her judgment in last quarter's review saved the firm from walking into a billion-dollar pitfall. Not many people could have spotted that risk." He returned his attention to me, his gaze sharp and approving. "You've made us all look good more than once, Ava, and I, for one, don't forget it." The silence that followed wasn't silence at all. It was the hum of recalibration, the collective awareness of my family rewriting their understanding of me in real time. The cousins shifted in their seats, embarrassed by their earlier smirks. My father cleared his throat, uncertain whether to be proud or defensive. My mother forced a smile that cracked around the edges, and Sloane, my brilliant, ruthless sister, stared at her plate as though it had betrayed her. Inside me, something old and tired straightened its spine. Years of being the quiet one, the dutiful one, the one who let Sloane shine even when it burned, suddenly felt less like a flaw and more like a strategy. All those nights when I stayed late at the office, compiling reports while she posted photos from rooftop parties, had led to this single public reversal. Her ridicule had been my cage, but Gregory's words had just unlocked the door. "I'm only doing my job," I murmured, though even I could hear the steel underneath. Gregory smiled knowingly, as if we both understood the difference between modesty and false modesty. He lifted his hand, signaling to the waiter. "Would you mind?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair beside me. "Vice President Carter, may I join your table?" The air snapped. Every eye swung to me, waiting for my answer, as though this one word, yes or no, would reveal the truth about who I had always been. And for the first time that morning, I didn't feel the weight of shame. I felt the delicious weight of power. And as Gregory pulled out the chair, the sound of wood against marble echoing like a gavel, I knew the balance of this brunch and my family's perception of me had just shifted forever. The cruelest part of family isn't what they don't know about you. It's what you decide not to tell them. For years, I had let my sister and parents be different. The truth looked like leaving the office at midnight, my heels in my hand because my feet had gone numb from 12 hours of meetings. The truth looked like conference calls that bled into weekends, redlined reports that I corrected until my eyes blurred, flights taken at dawn to negotiate with clients across the country. The truth looked like sacrifices my family never saw. Missed birthdays, canceled vacations, nights spent under fluorescent lights instead of city stars. My success was not glamorous. It was grueling. But it had given me something my sister's social climbing never could: credibility. I hid it from them not because I was ashamed, but because I understood the rules of my family. Sloane needed to be the star. My parents needed peace. And if I had stepped into the spotlight too forcefully, I would have been branded arrogant, competitive, cold. So I swallowed my promotions. I tucked away my titles. I allowed them to believe I was small, because smallness didn't threaten them. Sloane had mastered the art of performance long before brunches in Manhattan became our battlegrounds. Even as children, she would spin stories that painted her as the clever one, the bold one, the one destined for something bigger. I was content to let her perform, because peace was easier than pride. But now, with Gregory Whitaker seated at our table and calling me Vice President Carter, the narrative she had written was collapsing in real time, and the family who once smirked at me was blinking with new calculation. Sloane couldn't let it stand. She wouldn't. "So," she said, her voice bright, her smile sharpened to a blade, "Gregory clearly has you confused with someone else. Ava just keeps the office running. Schedules, filing, the little things that keep big people moving, right, Ava?" She tilted her head at me, daring me to contradict her. My mother gave me the look I knew too well. Don't stir the pot. My father cleared his throat as if to smooth over tension. It was the same choreography as always, except now there was an audience who knew the truth. Gregory raised an eyebrow but didn't correct her this time. He didn't need to. The weight of his earlier words was still heavy in the air, and no one could unhear them. But my sister was relentless. I pressed my hand lightly over the phone, trying to dim the screen before anyone noticed. But Sloane's eyes were quick, predatory. She leaned forward, her gaze sharp as glass. And before I could slide the phone into my lap, her manicured hand darted out and snatched it from the table. "What's this?" she said, her voice falsely sweet as she held it aloft. She squinted at the message, her face shifting from curiosity to panic in a heartbeat. "Acquisition notes?" she repeated, louder than necessary, her eyes flicking between me and Gregory. The table froze again. My cousins leaned forward, hungry for the drama. My parents stiffened, realizing they had been left out of something monumental. Gregory set down his glass, his expression unreadable but his silence deafening. And Sloane, my brilliant, ruthless sister, looked at me with dawning horror, because for the first time in our lives, she was holding proof that the story she'd told about me was a lie. And in that moment, watching her face pale, I felt the tide shift completely. "To my sister," Sloane announced, glass lifted high, her smile gleaming with the kind of practiced cruelty that photographs well. "Our waitress at heart." The clink of crystal echoed like a slap. Laughter sputtered around the table, uneasy, half-hearted, but loud enough to sting. My father chuckled a beat too late. My mother pressed her lips into a line that pretended to be polite amusement, and my cousins glanced at each other as if unsure whether they were supposed to laugh or wince. Brunch plates cooled beneath untouched forks. The room had shrunk, suddenly intimate. The spotlight narrowed to the sister standing in triumph and the one sitting in silence. It wasn't just the words, it was the delivery, the pause before waitress, the indulgent tilt of her head as though she were sharing an inside joke. The joke, of course, was me. She wanted the room to see me the way she had always wanted to see me. Small, harmless, serviceable. The girl who existed in the margins while she painted herself in bold strokes. Heat flushed my face and shame pooled in the pit of my stomach. I could hear the low hum of the restaurant around us, forks scraping plates, champagne corks popping at other tables, lives continuing unaffected. But here, in this corner, Sloane was rewriting me in real time, erasing every late night, every boardroom.
Doesn't belong in brunch chatter unless you belong in the room where it happens. As he stepped away, murmuring into his phone, Sloane leaned down beside me, voice sharp under her breath. "Please don't embarrass me in front of him." Embarrass her? The irony of it almost made me laugh. She had just called me a waitress to my face, in front of our parents, cousins, and colleagues. She had sliced me open with her toast and handed the table my insides for amusement. And yet in her mind, I was the liability. I was the risk. The one who might shatter the illusion she had built brick by brick. My mother laid a hand on my arm, her nails pressing just enough to warn me, let it go. It was always easier to protect the one who shouted loudest. Easier to appease Sloane than to acknowledge the quiet endurance she had trampled over for years. The familiar ache returned, the knowledge that my truth was too inconvenient for this family. But under the ache, something else was stirring, a defiance that had been waiting patiently for its moment. I reached for my glass, not to toast, but to give my hand something to do. And that's when I saw it. Her purse gaped open at the edge of the table, careless in her confidence. And sticking out was the same luxury receipt I had glimpsed earlier. This time, I caught the detail I had missed before, the signature at the bottom, her initials, bold and undeniable, the date printed clearly, yesterday. My pulse thudded in my ears. While she mocked me for being ordinary, she had left evidence of something extraordinary and dangerous carelessly exposed. A 5-figure purchase tied directly to her, attached to a company account she had no business using. I forced myself to look away before she noticed. The image burned into my memory like contraband. The laughter around me began to fade, replaced by the sound of my own breath steadying. Sloane thought she was in control, but for the first time in a long time, I realized she had left the first crack in her own armor. And as Gregory's voice carried back toward the table from across the restaurant, I knew that when he returned, I wouldn't be the one humiliated anymore. I hadn't planned to look, but the receipt all but begged me to read it. The glossy paper angled just enough for my eyes to catch the numbers. 5 figures. A purchase most like the prelude to a trial. I slipped the receipt back into the crease of her purse before anyone noticed my eyes lingering too long. My heart was racing, not because I feared what I'd seen, but because I understood the implications. A 5-figure charge, a luxury brand, a corporate card. My sister wasn't just reckless, she was sloppy. And sloppy had consequences, especially when your boss was Gregory Whitaker. Sloane, oblivious to my discovery, clinked her glass against my mother's and signaled for the waiter. "Another round of champagne," she announced, her voice a little too bright, as though bubbles could distract from the tension lingering at the table. My father smiled, relieved at the distraction, while my cousins leaned into the illusion, eager to drink their way back into comfort. It was her oldest trick. Create noise when silence threatened to reveal too much. I watched her pour energy into laughter, into anecdotes about her glamorous job, her connections, her busy calendar. Every word was calculated to steer attention back to her orbit, away from the shadow of the receipt resting inside her purse. For years, I had let her control the narrative. But now, with Gregory's earlier words still echoing in the air, the balance had shifted. I didn't need to expose her. Not yet. The beauty of power is knowing when to use it and when to wait. The waiter reappeared with another chilled bottle, setting it down with ceremony. Sloane filled glasses like a hostess at her own celebration. "To family," she declared, her smile sharp and insistent, as if daring anyone to refuse her toast. I raised my glass but didn't drink. My mind was spinning with images of that receipt, of her initials scrawled across numbers that didn't belong to her, and of the storm that would break if Gregory saw what I had seen. As if on cue, he returned. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Conversation slowed, laughter softened, eyes lifted toward him. Even in a crowded room, Gregory commanded space. He approached the table, still scrolling through a message on his phone, his focus precise. Then, without hesitation, he moved to the empty chair at my side and lowered himself into it. The scrape of wood against marble was louder than it should have been. Sloane's glass froze halfway to
They knew. And across from me, Sloane's face drained of color, her carefully constructed smile slipping into something brittle and broken. And in that delicious second, I realized the ridicule she had poured on me all morning had just turned into her own undoing. For the first time in my life, I watched my family's faces rearrange themselves in real time, like they had just realized the stranger sitting at the table. Gregory's words still hung between us, sharp and impossible to soften. Vice President Carter, we should discuss the expansion. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't announced it with the drama of a toast or a speech. But the title itself landed heavier than any glass of champagne, shattering years of assumptions in a single casual acknowledgement. My mother's pearls shifted as her chest rose and fell too quickly. My father leaned back, blinking as though recalibrating the daughter he thought he knew. My cousins glanced at one another, nervous laughter bubbling up only to die in their throats. The silence around the table was the silence of a script abandoned, Sloane's script, and her mask cracked right there in front of me. Her smile, the one she wore like armor, trembled. The edges curled down for just a fraction of a second before she pulled it back up again, but the damage was done. I saw the fear in her eyes, raw and unfiltered, the recognition that her mocking narrative had just been bulldozed by the truth. Gregory, oblivious or perfectly aware, continued with his calm precision. "Your analysis on the last 2 quarters was exemplary," he said to me, his voice measured, professional. "Without your oversight, the international merger would never have stabilized. I've presented your numbers to the board twice this week, and every time they've said the same thing. Carter saved us from walking blind." The word merger landed like a foreign language at the brunch table. My family shifted, uncomfortable with the reminder that there was a world of decisions happening beyond their reach. Sloane's hand twitched near her glass, her knuckles whitening as though gripping harder might anchor her to the story she had tried so desperately to... "Wait!" she blurted, too loudly, too fast. Her laugh cracked down the middle. You work with her?" She turned to Gregory, as if hoping he'd... Heart skipped, because I recognized the format instantly. An expense report. He placed it squarely between Sloane and me. "I trust you'll both want to see this," he said evenly. His eyes flicked once to mine, a flash of something I couldn't quite name. Respect, perhaps, or warning, before resting on Sloane. I looked down, my pulse pounding as the top page came into focus. Line items, dates, transactions, a company card tied to Sloane's department. And next to several entries, luxury charges, restaurant bills, boutique purchases, small red flags marked the margin. The air thinned. My mother pressed her lips together until they disappeared. My father coughed, a useless attempt at filling silence. My cousins leaned forward, hungry for the spectacle, their curiosity outpacing their discomfort. And Sloane, my perfect, untouchable sister, stared at the report as if it had sprouted fangs. Her mask cracked wider. Her fingers hovered above the page, trembling, before she pulled them back as though touching it might burn her. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The paper spoke louder than I ever could. And as the report sat between us, damning in its simplicity, I realized the power reversal was no longer just emotional. It was evidence. And evidence, unlike family, does not lie. "Ava," Gregory said, his voice calm but unyielding, "why don't you explain to your family how company policy views personal spending on corporate cards?" The words landed like a gavel striking oak. Every face at the table turned toward me, not out of curiosity, but with the sudden, uneasy weight of judgment. My throat tightened, not from fear, but from the strange dissonance of the moment. How many times had I walked executives through this very policy in sleek boardrooms, my voice steady under fluorescent lights? Only now I was being asked to perform the same act in front of the people who had spent years dismissing me as ordinary. I glanced down at the report spread across the linen. The flag charges glared back, neat rows of numbers, boutiques and restaurants and luxury purchases stacked like evidence in a trial. And there, in the middle of the page, was the exact receipt I had glimpsed in Sloane's purse. The date, the file with forks midair, sensing drama spill past the safe boundary of polite brunch. My mother reached for Sloane's arm, whispering urgently, "Keep your voice down." My father leaned forward, his tone sharp with practiced authority. "Gregory, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. My daughter wouldn't." But Gregory didn't flinch. He didn't soften. His gaze never left Sloane, though his voice stayed measured. "Mr. Carter, explanations are for Monday. Right now, what I see are repeated violations of expense protocol." He tapped the page lightly, his finger landing on the receipt I knew too well. "And I don't need anyone to twist knives. The numbers speak for themselves." Sloane's face flushed scarlet, her mask crumbling faster with each second. "You don't understand," she sputtered, turning wildly to the rest of the family, as if we were a jury she could sway. "She's always been jealous of me. She's waited for this moment, and now she's trying to destroy me in front of you. Can't you see that?" The irony almost made me laugh. For years, she had painted me as the jealous one, the small one, the one who couldn't measure up. And now, with proof bleeding across the paper, she was the one flailing, begging for allies. My mother's voice broke as she clutched Sloane's hand. "Please, let's just... not here, not like this." My father's jaw tightened, torn between defending one daughter and acknowledging the truth about the other. My cousins stared at me wide-eyed, their earlier smirks replaced by an uncomfortable awe. I sat in silence. Not because I didn't have words, but because silence was louder now. I didn't need to fight. The report was fighting for me. Gregory closed the folio with finality, the sound sharp enough to slice through Sloane's protests. "Enough," he said firmly, authority ringing in the single word. He stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate precision. "This will be handled Monday at headquarters." The table seemed to exhale all at once, a collective breath caught too long. My family's eyes darted between me and Sloane, unsure which daughter they should fear for or side with. Sloane slumped back into her chair. That brunch was a family space, not a courtroom. Somewhere behind their words was the old instruction I had internalized without protest. Make yourself smaller so the bigger personality can breathe. I swallowed hard, feeling the familiar muscle memory of compliance twitch to life, and then forced myself to breathe past it. All at once, the restaurant felt overlit. The white tile bounced our faces back at us, unforgiving. The cousins pretended to debate pastries they didn't want, their eyes flickering toward us with the fascinated discomfort of people stuck at a red light beside an accident. Sloane's chair sat slightly askew, her napkin crumpled and damp, the fragile scaffolding of her composure holding just enough to keep her upright. My father cleared his throat and leaned closer, his cologne a sudden, nostalgic fog. "Ava, please. Your sister is under a lot of pressure. This..." He nodded at the report like it was a rude guest who had barged in uninvited. "This can be sorted. We don't need to make a scene. Make a scene." I wanted to laugh at the phrasing, as though I had stood up and made a toast with my sister's dignity as the punchline, as though I had pulled the folio from Gregory's hands and paraded the red flags around the room. I stared at my father's mouth moving and saw, instead, all the times I had chosen the back row so Sloane could pose center stage. All the afternoons I'd listened to their praise fall on her like confetti, while I held the broom and dustpan of family harmony. I loved them. God, I did. But love that requires invisibility is not love that keeps you whole. "I didn't bring the report," I said quietly, keeping my voice a steady thread. "I didn't ask Gregory to sit here. I didn't write the numbers." I could feel the tremor in my mother's breath against my forearm, could hear the unspoken "yes, but you could choose to be kind." I thought of the word kind and how often it had been used to mean silent. Across the table, Sloane's eyes darted wildly, searching for a ledge. She smoothed her hair with a trembling hand, then reached for her glass and couldn't in the shower. A draft on her laptop blinked from sleep when I brushed past the desk. Resignation. Personal. I'd skimmed the first lines. Language about untenable conditions, about hostile leadership, about needing a new environment for growth before the shame of snooping set my face burning. I had closed the lid and said nothing when she emerged, wrapped in steam and confidence, a woman narrating triumph with teeth bared for the camera that wasn't there. That draft whispered now from the back of my mind,
as clearly as if the words were printed on the linen. She wasn't secure. She was staging. The luxury receipt in her purse. The way the waiter's tables already covered had made her flinch. The champagne ordered as distraction. Her frantic insistence that I keep quiet, all of it braided into a single, unlovely truth. She had been playing hot with a cold deck, and my unexpected presence had made the cards flash. "Ava," my mother's hand pressed harder, "we are asking you to be the bigger person." The phrase was so well worn in our family lexicon, it might as well have been embroidered on our dish towels. The bigger person had always meant the quieter sister, the reasonable daughter, the one who could be counted on to lay her dignity down on the altar of peace. I glanced at Gregory's empty chair, at the ring it had left in the rhythm of our table, and felt the old reflex war with a new allegiance, to myself, to the truth, to the employees whose budgets bent when people like Sloane treated company cards like stage props. "I'm not humiliating her," I said, and allowed tenderness into the sentence because I meant it. "I'm refusing to humiliate myself." My father's jaw worked, pride and panic grinding against each other. "We handle family things as family," he said, which would have been a more convincing mantra if the report hadn't been a legal document, if the money hadn't belonged to shareholders, if the problem weren't bigger than a Sunday. He looked at Sloane, then at me, like a man being asked to pick a favourite child mid-fire drill. Sloane seized the opportunity, leaning towards him with a small, ragged sob. "Dad, I swear, I didn't mean—" She cut herself off, perhaps realising that intent matters less than impact when the numbers are inked.
Brunch time up by an hour to beat the crowd, the way she had steered the conversation hard and fast into caricature, the waiter's announcement about the bill already covered. It clicked in a quiet, almost elegant progression. This had been choreographed, down to the angle of her purse, and my arrival had knocked the lighting rig. If I hadn't come, would Gregory have stopped by, paid, praised? Or had the covered table been her flex, a mirage paid for with a card that now bled red flags? "I can fix this," she said suddenly, her voice pitched at me and no one else, the bravado back but fraying at the edges. "I just need you not to make it worse. Don't look at me like I'm the villain. You of all people should understand what it costs to stay in rooms like these." There it was, the first honest sentence she'd given me all day. The cost. Rooms like these always have one. Some people pay in hours and eyesight and standing up straight when your spine is exhausted. Some pay in borrowed money and the lie that it is brief. "Sloane," I said, not unkindly. I wanted to tell her that I understood the hunger, even if I refused the theft. I wanted to tell her that I still remembered us in Ohio, splitting a single Sunday and counting out the tips of the waitress we adored, promising we'd be women we became who made our own money and never treated anyone like furniture. But there was no time to reach back for us. The present was chewing too loudly. My mother's whisper returned, softer now, as if smoothing my hair. "Please, Ava, not in front of everyone." She flicked her eyes toward the room, as though the strangers were cameras feeding a jury I hadn't agreed to face. I could have capitulated. I could have said for her sake, "I will hold this until the car ride home." But Monday hovered like weather, and I wouldn't let my conscience catch pneumonia because the family preferred fog. "Everything all right here?" The waiter appeared like Grace, refilling water glasses we hadn't touched, pretending not to see the tightness in our mouths. The interruption loosened something. Sloane pushed back her chair, the legs squealing protest across stone. Her eyes glistened with the clarity of a storm finally breaking. "Come with me," she said, not a request but a trembling command. "Now." She did. The restrooms was narrow and cool, the noise of the dining room receding like tide. Sloane shouldered open the door to the ladies' room, and the hush inside, cool marble, soft lighting, a faint scent of lavender, felt obscene compared to the chaos in our throats. She turned to face me, eyes swimming and rimmed in red, mascara perilously close to betraying her. And for the first time all morning I saw the child I used to protect
break through the woman who had mocked me. "Please, play it down," Sloane said, voice raw, and too loud in the echo of tile and marble. "You'll destroy me." The door swung shut behind us with a hush that made the dining room feel like a different planet. Under the soft glow of the sconces, her face looked younger than it had at the table. All bravado rinsed away, mascara threatening to surrender. She leaned against the counter as if her knees had been quietly arguing with gravity for the past hour and were finally losing. I stood opposite her, the mirror throwing us back at ourselves. Two women with the same jawline and different survival strategies, each waiting for the other to speak first. "I'm not trying to destroy you," I said, "and I meant it in the way you mean things you've rehearsed for years. I didn't bring Greg over. I didn't write those charges. I didn't raise my hand for any of this." She shook her head, hard enough to send a strand of hair skimming her cheek. "You don't get it. You never have. It's not just a bad month. It's not shopping." She swallowed, pressed the heel of her hand to one eye like she could push the tears back where they came from. "I borrowed it." The word hung there, skittish and dishonest even in its attempt to be honest. Borrowed. Like the money had left its rightful place politely and would return after a weekend at the lake. "For personal reasons," she added quickly, as if getting ahead of the accusation might soften it. "I was going to pay it back before anyone noticed. I've been covering more than you think. Mom's dental stuff, the out-of-pocket part they never told her insurance wouldn't cover. Dad's car dying right before the winter. Rent on my
Paint. Helping the family doesn't mean stealing from your company, I said, careful with each syllable because accusation was a match, and this room was full of powder. It doesn't mean signing your initials on a 5-figure charge and pretending it's a client gift. Sloane winced, as if I'd pressed a fresh bruise. "It was a bridge," she said quickly, leaning forward, palms flat on the cool counter. "A bridge between what I have and what I need. Greg—" She stopped, mouth tightening, recalibrating. "Mr. Whitaker is the kind of man who notices loyalty, not line items. If I landed the Valencia account, no one would care about a few entries that read like a holiday. I was close, Ava. I was so close, and then you walked in." The last sentence wasn't a knife. It was a confession wearing a knife's jacket. I felt the old ache of being blamed for weather. "I walked in to eat eggs with our parents," I said. "You staged a coronation. You asked the band to play before you had a crown. You think I don't know that?" Her laugh came out broken. "You think I don't wake up at 3 a.m. and count what I owe to everyone for everything? You think I haven't sat on my shower floor and promised God and the grout that I'll be better tomorrow? You have always had your spreadsheets and your process and your clean answers. I'm just trying to keep up, and the treadmill keeps tilting." She was good at this, building a case with the debris of feelings, naming the storm and hoping I would forget the forecast. But there was another truth walking in beside her, the string of borrowed favors that had turned into a habit, the expectation that consequences were a tax she could negotiate down if she smiled and threw a party loud enough. "There's a difference," I said gently, "between asking for help and laundering it through a corporate card." The flush rose back into her cheeks, defensive now. "You of all people should understand pressure. You stand in rooms where one wrong call costs people their jobs. You think I don't feel that? You think I don't know what it means to be the one who has to dazzle or disappear?" She swallowed. "I was never going to let it become a thing. I would have wiped it clean this month. It got away from me, that's all." Coding error in the expense system. Tell him the boutique comped most of it after a return, and the receipt just didn't reflect. "You're Vice President, Carter. Say it like that, and they'll nod. They always nod for you." "They nod because the numbers add up," I said, "because I don't throw champagne on a fire and call it rain." Her mouth twisted, wounded. "So this is about being better than me." "It's about being better than this," I said, and I heard something unfamiliar in my voice, a refusal that didn't need to raise itself to be heard. "You can't ask me to launder your choice through my credibility. You're not a child who picked something up at a candy store. You're a department head on paper who signed her initials to money that isn't hers. Sloane's shoulders sagged. For a second, I thought she might slide to the floor. Then she caught herself on the counter and stared at the mirror like she could locate the version of herself who hadn't yet stepped over the line. I know, okay? But you also know Mom and Dad. You know how they'll talk about this in rooms we're not in for the next decade. You know how Thanksgiving will stretch under it. I asked for help because I thought you'd understand that our last name weighs more in this city than policy does. It struck me how narrow her world had become, how much of it was still high school hallways and approval ratings, how little space policy and principle had ever been given at that table. Policy is how I sleep, I said softly. It's how I keep the lights on for the people who don't get invited to brunch with bosses. It's how I make sure the assistants don't get fired when someone upstairs borrows. If I bend it for you, I bend it for the men who look like Greg and talk like thunder and believe rules are a suggestion. I won't hand them my name to make their lives easier. She blinked, and the tears finally broke. Not a sobbing flood, but a quiet overflow that made her look, for the first time all morning, like someone I could still cross a room for. Then what am I supposed to do? She asked, voice small with the shock of having run out of exits. You're supposed to tell the truth, I said, before someone else tells it for you. You're supposed to return what you can, show the receipts, own the rest. You're supposed to stop before the floor gives way. She searched my face as if the truth might be more bearable.
The moment wobbled. I watched calculation flicker back across her features, the survival instinct that had kept her glamorous and teetering in equal measure. Maybe there's a middle, she said, hope skidding dangerously. Maybe you talk to him first. You tell him my numbers look messy because accounting miscoded the Valencia hospitality events, which they did sometimes, you've said that, and then I pay back the difference quietly. It would be clean. Cleaner than court, cleaner than headlines. You're still trying to skip the part where you say the thing, I said, not unkindly. There isn't a middle that doesn't start with that. Her jaw set, a last-ditch holdout. She opened her mouth to argue, and stopped when my phone buzzed inside my bag, the sound unnaturally loud in the soft room. We both looked down at the same time, as if the device had grown a voice that could arbitrate. I fished it out with fingers that suddenly felt clumsy, thumb waking the screen. A new message pulsed from Gregory. Bring the receipt Monday. We'll settle this. The words were clean, unadorned, final in the way weather is final when it breaks over a city that pretended the forecast was a rumor. I lifted my eyes to Sloane. She read it without me turning the screen, because some sentences write themselves across a face before they appear in pixels, and in the quiet that followed, she exhaled like a woman who had finally heard the end of the song she'd been dancing around, and knew there was no more music left to cover the truth. The first thing I heard when I pushed through the glass doors of headquarters wasn't the hum of the security gates or the click of my heels against polished stone. It was the whisper that slid down the hallway like static. That's her. The words followed me past the reception desk, through the atrium where portraits of former CEOs watched in solemn silence. Assistants with clipboards lowered their voices as I passed, glancing from their screens to me with expressions they thought were discreet. The Monday morning rhythm, coffee runs, elevator doors sliding open, papers rustling into order, was underscored by a new pulse, a murmur that clung to my name. The woman who had sat across from her sister at brunch. The woman who had let the truth step into the light instead of hiding it. The woman who had chosen loyalty to long table, gleaming, leather chairs already filled with directors and senior executives. Gregory stood at the head, tall and composed, his hands folded behind his back. The screens along the walls were already awake, blue with company logos, ready to host whatever evidence was about to redraw the lines. I slid into my seat, my badge clipped neatly to my blazer, every line of my posture deliberate. But even as I settled in, the quiet royal inside me hadn't stilled, because today wasn't just about policy. Today was about whether truth could survive politics, whether merit could outweigh perception, whether being right mattered more than being convenient. Beside me, I felt a presence lean close. Michael, a colleague from strategy, The kind of man who always played both sides until the winning one revealed itself. His voice was low, pitched for me alone. "Don't assume the board will side," he murmured. "They like a clean story, not a messy one. And family mess, that stains worse than fraud." I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because the comment wasn't advice. It was warning. The kind a false ally whispers when they hope you'll doubt yourself enough to stumble. Michael had always been polite, but his ambition was he wasn't afraid of fraud staining the company. He was afraid of me stepping into light that might outshine his own. The room settled. Papers shuffled, glasses of water sweated against coasters. Gregory cleared his throat, his voice steady but commanding enough to silence the hum of side conversations. "We have an agenda to follow," he said. "But some matters require urgency." He reached for the folio on the table, the same one that had sat like a loaded gun at brunch. "Today, we must address the misuse of funds by one of our own department heads." I didn't let my eyes move toward Sloane. I didn't need to see her, to feel her, seated at the far end of the table, shoulders stiff, jaw locked. The weight of her presence pressed against me, like a memory I didn't want but couldn't erase. Gregory's gaze swept the room, measuring, assessing, commanding. Then he set the folio down, opened it, and looked directly at me. "Vice President Carter," he
Ridicule, rewritten as respect. The first slide hit the screen with a glow that made the room itself feel colder. Columns of numbers lined up like soldiers, and at the top of each entry was a small red flag pulsing against the white background. Gregory didn't need to raise his voice when he spoke. The evidence spoke for him. "Here," he said, clicking to the next slide, "is a summary of flagged expenses submitted under Department Head Carter." His tone was flat, clinical, but the implication throbbed beneath every word. The screen shifted again, and there they were, charges tied to my sister's ID. Luxury boutiques, 5-star dinners, hotel stays that had no client name attached. Each line item carried a date, each date a shadow. I kept my posture straight, pen in hand, though I had no need to write. Around the table, directors leaned forward, their expressions tightening. They weren't shocked, executives rarely are, but they were focused, and focus in a boardroom can weigh heavier than outrage. At the far end of the table, Sloane shifted in her chair. Her face, polished and calm at brunch, was now drawn tight. She tapped one manicured nail against her water glass, faster with every new slide that illuminated the screen. When Gregory paused to sip from his glass, she pounced. "This isn't me," she blurted, voice sharper than she intended. "Someone's manipulated the entries. I was framed." The word framed ricocheted through the room. A few eyebrows arched. One director scribbled something onto his notepad with unnecessary vigor. The head of HR, a woman named Evelyn who had seen a decade of corporate implosions, folded her arms and waited. Sloane doubled down, desperate. "You have to understand, I don't even handle these expenses directly. I delegate. My assistant has access. Anyone could have—" She stopped herself, realizing the hole she was digging. "I've been targeted. Someone's trying to take me down." Her eyes darted toward me then, flickering with accusation she was too afraid to name aloud. For a split second, I saw her rehearse the betrayal she wanted to stage, the claim that I had planted evidence, that I had engineered this moment. But even she knew it wouldn't hold. Too many numbers, too many receipts, too many initials. Michael, the colleague who had warned me earlier, cleared his throat as if preparing to intervene. But
"I'd never—" But her voice faltered under the weight of the screen. The slides didn't care about tone. The receipts didn't care about tears. I sat in stillness, every muscle trained to resist the urge to speak. This wasn't my moment, yet. But the director's eyes were already drifting toward me, one by one, as if they sensed I held something more. They remembered Gregory's words. "Vice President Carter will lead today's review." Finally, Evelyn from HR leaned forward, her pen clicking once against her notebook. Her voice was calm but unyielding. "Vice President Carter," she said, her gaze steady on mine. "You've heard the evidence. You've seen the receipts. You know the policies better than anyone in this room." She paused, long enough for the air to press against my lungs. "Do you formally accuse your sister of misusing company funds?" The room hushed. every whisper, every shuffle of paper, every sideways glance fell away. The only sound was the low hum of the projector, casting red flags across the faces around me. And in that silence, the question cracked open the fault line between family and truth. The entire room was waiting for me to choose which side of the line I stood on. The USB slid into the port with a click that sounded louder than it should have, and as the screen blinked awake, a hidden folder surfaced on its own, as if impatient to be seen. Confidential. The projector's light washed the boardroom in sterile blue. Everyone leaned forward instinctively, directors gripping pens tighter, HR pressing lips into a thin line, and my sister, my flawless, untouchable Sloane, stiffening like a deer that had just spotted headlights. I felt the weight of the moment press into my ribs. The evidence had been sitting here all along, and now the file itself was demanding an audience. With one keystroke, the folder opened. The air thickened. Line after line of emails spilled across the screen, each subject line like a small hammer cracking the surface of the life Sloane had built. Request to transfer surplus budget. Reimbursement claim, hospitality expenses. Wire confirmation. Each message bore her signature. Each attached spreadsheet revealed funds funneling into personal accounts disguised as vendor payments. Some were small, 300 here, 700 there. The smooth mask she had perfected for years. She turned toward me, her finger jabbing the air like an accusation. "You think you're better than me, don't you? Sitting there, hiding behind your spreadsheets and your titles, letting them paint you as some kind of savior. But you stole everything from me. Everything. My parents' love, their pride, the opportunities I should have had." Her words ricocheted through the room, and for a moment I wasn't Vice President Carter. I wasn't the woman with the polished blazer and the careful notes. I was the younger sister again, sitting at the dinner table while she commanded every story, every laugh, every ounce of oxygen. The familiar ache rose in me, the one that had kept me quiet for decades. But this time, the ache didn't demand silence. It demanded clarity. "I didn't steal anything," I said, my voice even, unshaken. "I earned it. The hours you spent chasing attention, I spent working. The nights you used to mock me for staying in, I was building something. The respect you wanted handed to you, I earned the hard way. And the money you took?" I gestured toward the glowing screen. "That was never yours to begin with." The boardroom remained still. The directors, seasoned veterans of scandal, didn't flinch at emotion, but I could see their focus sharpen. Not on Sloane's fury, on the evidence, on me. Evelyn from HR leaned forward, her pen tapping against her notebook. "Ms. Carter," she said, addressing Sloane, "the digital trail here is extensive. Each transfer ties directly back to your login credentials. We can verify timestamps. We can verify devices." She paused, her eyes narrowing with quiet precision. "This isn't a matter of misinterpretation. It's a matter of intent." Sloane's mask finally cracked completely. Her face twisted, half fury, half despair. "You all just want someone to blame," she spat, her voice shaking. "And Ava, perfect Ava, makes the perfect executioner. She's been waiting for this. She's wanted me gone since we were kids." The room held its breath, and in the silence, Gregory stepped forward, his presence commanding, his voice unyielding. "No one here is waiting for your sister to destroy you." In her chair, mascara streaking, nails tapping against the wood in frantic rhythm. For the first time, she looked small. For the first time, she looked breakable. And I sat still, the glow of the screen washing over me, feeling the echo of every brunch, every slight, every dismissal finally tilt into something else. Power, yes, but not the cheap, mocking kind my sister had thrived on. The kind that comes from standing in truth when the world begs you to stay quiet. And as Gregory's declaration hung in the air, I realized the story wasn't ending here. It was only about to grow louder, more public, more irreversible than either of us had ever imagined. The first camera light blinked red, and in that instant I knew.
This wasn't a boardroom anymore. It was a tribunal, live-streamed to employees across the company, journalists clustered outside the glass, and a city waiting for spectacle. The room had been rearranged for the hearing. The long, polished table was replaced by rows of chairs facing a raised dais, where 3 arbiters sat like judges, their expressions carved from stone. Screens flanked the room, already glowing with documents. The receipt from the luxury boutique, the resignation draft I had once stumbled upon in my sister's apartment, the altered spreadsheets pulled from her login. They floated like ghosts above us, visible to everyone, undeniable in their detail. The hum of whispers filled the room. I caught fragments. Her sister, the VP, fraud, betrayal, names and roles twisted together until they sounded like folklore. I straightened my blazer, anchored myself with a deep breath, and reminded myself that truth doesn't waver, even when eyes are watching from every corner. Sloane sat across from me, her face pale but painted, her posture straight, as if she could still perform her way through this, but her hands betrayed her, fingers twitching against her lap, nails tapping the rhythm of panic. She glanced at the cameras, then at the arbiters, then finally at me, with a glare that mixed rage with something that looked almost like pleading. The lead arbiter, a gray-haired woman with a voice as measured as a gavel strike, began. "We are convened today to address allegations of financial misconduct."
Named had already declined dinner for that date, Gregory interjected, his voice slicing through hers. Another slide appeared, an email from the supposed client, time-stamped the day before, politely refusing the invitation. Sloane faltered. Her lips pressed together, color rising to her cheeks. The screens shifted again. This time, it was the resignation draft, the one I had once seen open on her laptop, never meant for other eyes. Lines of frustration and accusations against management filled the screen. The arbiter's eyes scanned silently, noting the date, noting the bitterness. "This was never submitted," one of them remarked. "No," Sloane snapped, her voice cracking. "Because I stayed. I stayed loyal. I didn't walk out like I wanted to. Doesn't that matter?" But the words sounded hollow. They weren't loyalty. They were desperation dressed as duty. The final set of documents filled the screens, altered spreadsheets. Numbers shifted, lines erased, balances adjusted, all under her login, all traced to her device. The arbiters conferred quietly among themselves, their whispers inaudible over the oppressive silence. Then Evelyn from HR stepped forward, reading her notes. "The evidence forms a consistent pattern," she said. "Receipts misclassified, spreadsheets altered, funds redirected. This cannot be explained by accident." And then came the betrayal I hadn't anticipated, though I should have known it was coming. My mother rose from the gallery, escorted forward to the witness stand. She looked fragile, smaller than I had ever seen her, her pearls trembling against her collarbone. She cleared her throat, her voice soft but carrying. "My daughter Sloane. She is not a thief. She is not malicious. She's impulsive. She's carried too much. She's made mistakes, but she loves this family. She loves this company. Please don't ruin her for one mistake." The words sliced deeper than any accusation could. My mother's eyes found mine, pleading silently. "Be kind. Be the bigger person. Don't humiliate your sister." The script of my life replayed itself in her voice, right here under lights and judgment, in front of strangers and colleagues and the world. Sloane straightened,
Heard your mother's testimony. This company values integrity above all else. Before we deliberate, you will deliver your final statement. The weight of the moment pressed against my chest. Every camera, every pen, every eye waited for me. Family or truth? Loyalty or integrity? Silence or voice? And as the room hushed to hear me speak, I realized the story of two sisters was no longer just ours. It was about to belong to everyone watching. You mocked my simple job, I said, steadying my breath as the microphones caught the edge of my voice and carried it to every corner of the chamber. But it turns out it wasn't simple at all. For a heartbeat, the room held still, as if the cameras themselves had paused to listen. The arbiters sat like carved verdicts, pens poised above legal pads. Gregory lingered off to the side with that particular stillness I had come to recognize as attention sharpened to a point. Employees and reporters filled the rear rows with the rustle of fabric and paper and restrained impatience, the air dense with a curiosity that was part hunger and part dread. I could feel my mother's gaze like a wire stretched across a canyon, thin, trembling, desperate not to snap. And I could feel my father's stubborn pride trying to organize the facts into a story that did not hurt. Across from me, Leela stared at the tabletop as if willing its wood grain to offer a pattern that might lead her out. And for a strange, suspended second, I remembered the two of us as girls in Ohio, trading a single pair of borrowed skates at a frozen pond, laughing as we learned to balance. I let the image pass through me like weather, and then I let it go, because the pond had cracked, and we were not children, and the truth would not hold for nostalgia. I stayed quiet for years, I continued, not raising my volume, letting the clarity do the work my family had always tried to assign to charm, because I thought silence kept peace. I thought letting someone else take the spotlight meant I was strong enough to live in the shadows. But silence doesn't protect anyone. It protects the lie. And the lie here is that what I do is simple, that responsibility can be reduced to filing cabinets and calendar invites, that integrity is a personality explained themselves, the spreadsheets with edits that did not happen by accident and did not happen by themselves. You've audited the logins and the devices. You've traced the transfers. You've watched this pattern repeat without the friction of oversight because the person steering the account believed that audacity would be mistaken for authority. I am not here to enjoy this. I am not here to win a family quarrel in public. I am here because the people whose budgets stretch over payroll and vendor invoices do not get to borrow from the till to keep up with a story about a life that photographs well. I let the word borrow sit in the air. And I watched Lila flinch because she had used that word in a tiled room with soft lighting and a lavender scent and hoped it would pass for an apology. She looked up at me now with the heat of an old grievance burning her expression into something that might have been anger if it were not also fear. You stole everything from me, she said earlier, and the echo of it tried to find me even now, tried to make me look at her like a rival instead of a woman who had made a series of choices that had finally met the one thing they could not charm: documentation. The policy is not ambiguous, I said, and as I heard the phrase leave my mouth, I realized I had said it 100 times, in smaller rooms, to men in suits who were used to hearing yes. Corporate funds are not for personal use. Client development is not a costume for luxury. Misclassification is not a rounding error when the numbers have 5 zeros and the receipts have initials that match the woman now asking the company to pretend this is weather. I've defended our compliance in rooms where the temperature drops 20 degrees the moment I speak, and I will defend it here, where the temperature is human and therefore much harder to manage. A low ripple moved through the gallery, agreement or discomfort I couldn't tell and didn't need to. I turned to the arbiters because they, at least, were not here for the drama. They were here to close a loop. I am not asking for spectacle. I am asking you to keep faith with the people who do not get invited to these hearings and whose work is invisibly made smaller by hard to be seen, and I misjudged what that required. But I am not malicious. The Valencia account was within reach until it wasn't. And some of these entries were miscoded by accounting and will be corrected. I'm asking for perspective. Perspective, Evelyn from HR repeated. Not cruelly, just as if she were tasting the syllables to see if they contained anything new. We have perspective. We also have timestamps and a pattern. She turned to the arbiters with an efficient nod. We recommend termination for cause and referral to counsel for charging decisions. The pause that followed was too brief to be suspense. It was procedure, the machine of consequence doing what it does when fed enough facts and enough courage. The lead arbiter's voice carried without needing to be loud. Effective immediately, Ms. Lila Carter is terminated from her position for cause. This matter will be referred to outside counsel for prosecution. Security will coordinate retrieval of company property. HR will provide the packet outlining next steps. This hearing is adjourned. There was no gavel. There didn't need to be. The word adjourned did the work of a door closing. The cameras blinked their last red blinks. The reporters leaned back to form sentences that would travel faster than our feet could carry us out. I heard my mother make a sound I had never heard before, low and small and mother-shaped, and I had to hold the edge of the table again because part of me wanted to move toward her, the way my body had always learned to move toward fires that had nothing to do with me. Lila stood too quickly and had to catch herself on the chair. Mascara had given up the pretense of stoicism and made gray smudges beneath eyes that had once taught me how to perfect winged liner. She looked at me the way you look at a window when you are trying to decide if it is a view or a wall. "Are you happy now?" she asked. And the childishness of the question did what I suppose it was designed to do. It tried to pull me into a fight that would make what had just happened seem smaller. "I'm not happy," I said, and the softness in the sentence surprised me. "I'm done pretending it's my job to keep the shape of ordinary." People stood in clumps and lowered their voices and said the kind of sentences that make gossip feel like participation. Gregory waited until the arbiters had left before he crossed the space between us with a pace that felt ceremonial, which is to say necessary and deliberate and in no hurry to be anything. He did not offer a handshake. He offered the simple respect of standing close without crowding. "Leadership," he said, "is choosing the room where you will be misunderstood and going anyway." I don't know if he had rehearsed the line or if it had just arrived, but I felt the recognition of it press against my ribs, the shape of so many nights where my work had been the least interesting thing about the work. "I didn't want this to be public," I said, because telling the truth about wanting a smaller stage is sometimes the only way to hold on to yourself when the stage is suddenly the size of... "And yet," he said, not with triumph, not with consolation, just with the observation of a man whose job it is to know when optics are also ethics, "there is value in letting the rooms beyond this one see what our values look like under pressure." Behind him I saw Michael, my corridor Cassandra, watching us with the look of a man updating an internal ledger. The board's general counsel conferred with Evelyn. A director whose approval used to exist behind a door nodded at me once, as if to slide a token across a counter. Gregory turned to the employees and press still lingering, raised a hand, and the residual buzz dimmed, because some people do not need microphones to be heard. "Before you disperse," he said, "there is one more piece of business. It is astonishing how fast a room relearns silence when it senses a second act." My mother looked up with a start, as if fearing another blow. My father stiffened into that posture that had impressed school principals and loan officers. I stood very still, because motion tends to leak meaning, and I had no more meaning to spare. "This company," Gregory continued, "has been the beneficiary of resilience disguised as modesty. Much of what keeps us upright has been done by people who think the work should speak louder than the worker. Today, the work has spoken, and I would like to adjust the volume we allow its authors." He did not look at me and find the girl on the frozen pond and tell her that balance had always been about the distance between fear and forward, and we had finally learned the measure. Instead, I inclined my head, not gratitude, not performance, just acceptance, which is a rarer muscle and therefore harder to hold. Gregory let the murmurs settle before adding the line that would travel with more heat than any of the rest, because the world likes a soundbite, and he knows what world we live in. He pivoted back to the audience, employees, press, family, strangers, and gave them the sentence that turned the arc from personal to structural. "She's not just VP," he said, crisp and unambiguous. "She's your new senior executive." Weeks later, I returned to the same brunch spot, but this time I carried the room instead of shrinking inside it. The place hadn't changed. The glass still sparkled in the sunlight, the marble floors still hummed with the sound of designer heels, the waiters still moved with precision, carrying silver trays that reflected the chandeliers. And yet, when I walked through the revolving doors, it felt as though the restaurant itself bent toward me differently, as though the very walls remembered what had happened last time, and wanted to make space for me to walk without lowering my head. The hostess greeted me warmly, her smile broader than it had been that infamous morning. "Good to see you again, Miss Carter," she said, as though she'd rehearsed the line. I nodded, acknowledging her tone, the shift in the air, the quiet respect. Respect that hadn't been there when I was just the sister with the simple job. Respect that only surfaced once the truth had introduced itself louder than I ever could. She led me toward a corner table where my parents and cousins were already seated. The arrangement was almost identical to before. Same table, same sunlight streaming across the plates, same hum of chatter around us. But the atmosphere was unrecognizable. My father rose when I approached, a gesture I couldn't remember him ever offering me before. His hug was quick, almost awkward, but it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. My mother reached for my hand as I sat, her grip gentle, her eyes softer than I had seen them in years. The cousins shifted in their chairs with nervous energy, eager to engage, eager not to repeat the mistakes of the past. And Lila's seat, her seat was empty. It was the absence that spoke louder than anything. My sister's absence was a ordinariness, leaned in with genuine curiosity. "So, senior executive, what's that like?" I smiled, not in triumph, but in clarity. "Busy," I said. "Demanding. Worth it." They nodded, not mocking, not diminishing, just listening. I realized then how little I had ever been listened to by them before. When the waiter brought coffee, he placed mine first, a small detail but one that carried its own current of change. I wrapped my hands around the cup, letting its warmth anchor me, and thought of the journal in my bag. Inside it, tucked neatly between pages of notes, was the luxury receipt, the same one I had once pulled from Lila's purse. I kept it not as evidence anymore, but as a motif, a reminder of the line between betrayal and justice, between humiliation and respect, between silence and voice. It lived in my journal like a pressed flower, fragile but permanent, proof of a moment that had broken me and rebuilt me in the same breath. Proof that sometimes the smallest piece of paper could carry the weight of transformation. Brunch unfolded quietly, without spectacle. No mocking toast, no staged distractions, no waiter announcing the bill had been covered. Just coffee, conversation, and the strange sensation of dignity where ridicule had once sat. But dignity, I realized, wasn't about their new behavior. It wasn't about my father's awkward respect, or my mother's softened eyes, or my cousin's curious questions. Dignity had never belonged to their approval. It had always belonged to me. The only difference was that I finally stopped asking them to validate it. I leaned back in my chair, breathing in the ordinariness of it all, and felt the transformation settle deeper than titles or promotions. I was no longer the girl who downplayed her job to avoid jealousy. I was no longer the sister who bit her tongue to keep the peace. I was no longer the daughter who lived in the shadow of someone else's spotlight. I had stopped apologizing for my success. And that, more than the title, more than the respect, more than the empty seat, was the real reversal. After brunch, I stepped outside into the crisp city air. The streets bustled with Sunday life, but for once the noise didn't press against me. It carried me. I walked back to my office, high above the city, glass wall, the paper impossibly light for what it suggested. A warning. A threat. Or, perhaps, just the beginning of another unraveling. The city lights flickered against the glass as I leaned back in my chair, tracing the edge of the receipt with my thumb. My journal lay open on the desk, the old receipt pressed into its pages like history preserved. I slipped the new one beside it, two fragments of betrayal folded into the same story. And I thought of the question that had haunted me since that brunch table weeks ago. When even your own sister laughs at your worth, Do you stay quiet? Or do you wait for the day truth introduces itself louder than you ever could? The truth had spoken once already, reshaping my life in ways I was still learning to carry. But now, with a second receipt in my hands, I knew something else. Truth never speaks just once. It waits, it watches, and then it knocks again. And as I closed the journal, the weight of both receipts pressing together, I understood. The story wasn't finished. Another storm was already on its way. If this story struck a chord, tell me in the comments which moment hit you hardest. Was it the brunch humiliation, the boardroom tribunal, or the final hearing? And what would you do if a mysterious receipt like that landed on your desk? Would you expose it or bury it? Share your take below, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next twist. Because when the next receipt surfaces, you'll want to be the first to see the truth.